Hotel family, welcome back to Matthew Daniels TV. Today we're going to be doing part two of Fugitive Slave William Grimes, The Interesting Life. If you haven't already, it would be a good idea after watching this video to go back to the video I posted before this one when I did part one. It's chock full of a lot of information that that you're definitely going to want to see. So if you give me just a second, I'm going to make sure that my screen share is working properly and make sure that my audio is working properly. And then we're going to get into the information. Thank you guys for tuning in as always. Let me see. Let's see if we can do it like this. I want to see how this looks. Okay. I probably won't be able to make it big if I do it like that. All right, let me stop sharing. I'm going to share the screen another way. I'm going to share the screen a different way because I want to make sure that you guys can see everything. All right, let me pull up the PowerPoint. Let me make sure the PowerPoint is good. Make sure the audio is good. All right, here we go. Okay, so again, this is going to be part two of Fugitive Slave William Grimes, The Interesting Life. And we're going to be looking at the book that William Grimes wrote himself. As always, on this channel, we like to allow the ancestors to speak, and we like to talk about the history of our ancestors on these shores, but we like to talk about it from the perspective of our ancestors themselves. We don't need secondary sources. We don't need third-hand voices to tell us what our ancestors' lives were like. We don't need fourth, fifth, sixth generations after our ancestors who endured the horrors of slavery to tell us what it was like. We can go directly to the source. So I implore anyone that is interested in the topic of our ancestors and what they had to endure during the time period of American slavery to look into a genre of literature that's known as slave narratives. There are around that I know of around 200 or 250 actual books like the one that you're seeing on your screen right now that have been written by our ancestors who were formerly enslaved. And there are also thousands, upwards of 6,000 slave narratives that are in interview form that were documented in the early 1900s, around 1935, 36, 37, somewhere in there, where members of the federal government working with what was known as the Federal Writers Project, they went around and interviewed our ancestors who were still alive, and sometimes their children, but primarily our ancestors who were still alive, who were actually enslaved before the Civil War. And they allowed them to tell their story, their family histories, the plantations that they were enslaved on. And they were able to talk about exactly what slavery was like. So without any further ado, let's get into part two. And again, we're just going to be picking up at a particular point in the life of William Grimes. And if you want to go back all the way to the beginning of the book, you would have to go back and watch part one. So we're going to start here. William gets sold to Archibald Bullock for $500 in Savannah, Georgia. Now, like I said in the previous video, William Grimes had around 10 different owners throughout his lifetime. He had like 10 different masters. So he was sold several times. And he tells us himself that each time that he was sold for the price of $500. Now, there was no set price for an enslaved Negro during the time of American slavery. The prices varied on who was selling the person, who was buying the person, their age, their gender, what they looked like, and what they could do. Some of our ancestors were skilled in trades. They were blacksmiths, they were carpenters, they were builders, they were barbers. They knew how to do specific jobs as opposed to simply picking cotton or working in a tobacco field or working in a sugarcane field. They were skilled laborers, and individuals that were skilled laborers obviously required a higher price. But we know with William Grimes, he was sold every time for the price of $500. Now, why I want to start with this particular slave master, Archibald Bullock, is because I keep mentioning how during important points of American history, our ancestors were always right there. Because they were slaves, the general historical record seems to write them out as if they weren't right there when major milestones in American history was taking place. But our ancestors were there. Our ancestors were there at all of the crucial and critical moments which built and forged and molded our nation into what it is today. And when we look into these slave narratives, we find out firsthand who some of our ancestors were that were on the ground when important things were happening. And not only that, there are several people who could be considered American heroes or who are important characters to American history. And when we talk about these characters who are important to American history, the Europeans, right, with the backgrounds from European nations, we have to always understand that right there with those characters, our ancestors knew these people. They spoke to these people. They have stories about these people, and they were enslaved to these people. So there's no way to separate our ancestors from the critical events in American history and the critical people in American history. Case in point, there's one man, Archibald Bullock. Now, I'm going to explain to you why he's important to American history, but let's first see what the ancestor William Grimes says about him. Okay. He says, sometime previous to my master selling me, I had heard that A.S. Bullock, Esquire, agent for the Navy, who had engaged a carriage and pair of horses coming on from New York, which he expected very soon, wanted to buy a servant to drive and take care of them. Now, this A.S. Bullock, Esquire, is Archibald Stobo Bullock. Keep that in mind. I went to see him and inquired if he would buy me. He replied, yes, if your master will sell you. I then went to my master and told him Mr. Bullock wished to buy me, provided he would sell me. He then said to me, where did you see Mr. Bullock? Have you been there to try to induce him to buy you? I replied, no, sir. He saw me in the street and inquired of me whether my master wished to sell me. So a lot of times with William Grimes, when he became upset with one of his slave masters or they treated him too harshly, he would actively seek out someone else to buy him just so he can change masters, which is one of the reasons why he had 10 slave masters over the time period that he was enslaved. And it was somewhat easy for him to get someone new to buy him because, like I explained in the first video, he was 3 parts white. He was so white, in fact, he passed as a white man on multiple occasions. The only way that you would know that he wasn't a white man is if someone told you, or based on how he dressed, or if you seen him around his slave master. And so when you had an individual that was extremely light, a slave that was extremely light skinned or even white, these slaves sometimes received preferential treatment on various plantations, and they got jobs working inside of the house, driving the carriage. They didn't have cars back then. And so a lot of times you would have horse-drawn carriages. And so a lot of slave owners, they wanted the light, almost white slave driving their carriage, driving them around, being their body servant, going with them from place to place, because the color of your skin mattered so much in America during that time period. Obviously, white, right, black, slave. That's just how they segregated and separated the world. And so William Grimes wanted to be sold from his current slave master. And so he had heard that Archibald Bullock was looking for a new servant to drive his horses. So while he was out one day, he approached him and, hey, I heard you was looking for a servant. Do you want to buy me? My master wants to sell me. So Archibald Bullock tells him, yeah, I am looking for a servant. If your master is willing to sell you, I'll buy you. So William goes back to his current slave master, tells him that Archibald Bullock wants to buy him. And long story short, he ends up saying that, okay, if he wants to buy you, he has to come here and talk to me himself. So William goes back. He talks to Archibald Bullock and tells him, my master says that he'll sell me to you, but you have to go and talk to my master yourself to purchase me. And so Archibald Bullock, instead of doing that, he took his young son. He gave his young son $600 and told his son, look, go back to William Grimes, current slave master. Tell him if he wants to sell him, here's $600. He can either keep the whole $600, or if he wants to sell him less, give me back whatever change you want to give me. So William Grimes' current slave master took $500, gave the young man $100 back. He brings the $100 back to his father, and bam, William Grimes gets sold to Archibald Bullock. And so now he's living in Savannah, Georgia. Now, who is Archibald Bullock? Now, there's 2 Archibald Bullocks in the historical record that's around this time period. So the one that we're looking for is the one that I have on your screen. He was born in 1767 and he died in 1830. Now, look what the American Aristocracy website has to say. It says that he was born at Savannah, Georgia. He became a commission agent, factor, and the collector of customs for the port of Savannah. And he held this position from 1810 to 1822. He was also one of the justices in the inferior court and fought in the War of 1812. In 1793, at Savannah, he married his wife, Sarah, daughter of John Glenn, Chief Justice of Georgia. They lived at the Bullock Mansion on Orleans Square, Wimberley on the Isle of Hope, and the Wormslow Plantation. They were the parents of 3 daughters and 5 sons. So this guy was a major politician and a war veteran in the state of Georgia. He fought in the War of 1812, which was fought against the British, and they did some other attacks on several other European nations, but it was primarily the United States fighting with the British. That was the War of 1812. So Archibald Bullock, he fought in that war. He was a justice in the inferior courts, and he had political status. He had money, and he came from money, and he came from political prestige. All of these people with prestige, power, and money They all own slaves. So damn near anybody from that time period in certain states who is any type of figure in American history, they own slaves or their family members did. Now, his father was also named Archibald Bullock, and his father was the first governor and president of the state of Georgia. Now, this is why I keep pointing out that our ancestors are intimately connected to what we generally know of as American heroes. Now, look, this Archibald Bullock is the father of the man who owned William Grimes. Look what it says. It says Archibald Stobo Bullock was an American lawyer, military officer, and politician who served as the 7th governor of Georgia from 1776 to 1777. So he's right there, and this is going to be important, but he's right there when America is declaring their independence from Britain and King George. Remember, America, the Independence Day is known as July 4th, 1776. Look, he was born in the province of South Carolina. Bullock fought in the Georgia militia during the American Revolution. The American Revolution is the war against the British, and was also a great-grandfather of Martha Bullock Roosevelt and great-great-grandfather of Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th president of the United States. So remember, I told you that William Grimes, I told you this on part 1, William Grimes actually went to Monticello and may not have met him face to face because he was enslaved. Don't misinterpret what I'm saying. But he went to Monticello and met the former president Thomas Jefferson, signer of the Declaration of Independence. And now William Grimes has been bought by the son of the man who is the great-great-grandfather of another American president, Theodore Roosevelt. So you see how these circles of power, these families, these groups, all of these people, they know each other. All of these grand senators and governors and major politicians and war heroes and lieutenants and generals and presidents and vice presidents from the past, they were all intimately connected with each other. And a lot of them, damn near all of them, come from high-born families with high-born family names that go all the way back to France, Britain, Germany, Spain, Portugal. And when they came over here, those same families with the money, they were the same people that were in control. But look what it says. Bullock was born in 1730 in Charleston, South Carolina. He was the son of James Bullock and his wife, Jean, both Scotland, and was named after his maternal grandfather. After receiving his education in Charleston, he began to practice law and was commissioned as a lieutenant in the South Carolina militia. So he was in the South Carolina militia, and he was also in the Georgia militia. And he was the first governor of Georgia and what one may call the first president of Georgia. Because remember, before we became the United States, it was separated into the 13 colonies. Now, there is a bust of Archibald Bullock, the father of the man that owned William Grimes, at the Washington Wilkes Historical Museum. And you see it on your screen right now. It says Archibald Bullock, 1730 to 1777, a leader of the revolutionary movement in Georgia, Speaker of the Georgia Royal Assembly, member of the Continental Congress, President of the Georgia Provincial Congresses, first President and Commander-in-Chief of Georgia. Very important man, very powerful man, very strong political background. And in fact, this gentleman was supposed to be one of the gentlemen who signed the Declaration of Independence, but he had gone back to Georgia to serve in the militia of Georgia. And so he was not there when the signing of the declaration took place, but he was definitely one of the individuals who was supposed to sign the Declaration of Independence. Now, one thing that you have to understand as well, um, when our ancestors were enslaved, there was multiple types of jobs that they did. We're all familiar with plantation work. Uh, Picking cotton is the main one that we see in movies, that we hear reference, that people talk about, that people know about. Picking cotton, working in the fields. But all slave labor was not field labor. Sometimes what the slave master would do, they would hire their slaves out to other people who needed work done. So let's say I'm a guy, I have a ship, I need some ship hands, and I don't own any slaves myself. I can go to someone who owns slaves and I can say, hey, I'll give you $20 a month if you let me use this particular slave right here to work on my vessel. And the slave owner can say, okay, for $20 a month, you can have him. And then that slave will go work with that individual for however many months they agree upon. And all of the money that he earns will go to the slave master. Another thing that they did was they would hire their slaves out, but in some instances, they would hire them out for a certain fee and say, okay, listen, I'm going to let you go work. I need you to work for me, but you need to bring me back a certain amount of money every week from your work. Anything extra that you earn, you can keep for yourself. This is how some of our ancestors, even in slavery, was able to earn money. And sometimes in earning that money, they were able to buy their own freedom. And not only buy their own freedom, buy the freedom of their wife, buy the freedom of their child, buy the freedom of their parent. So one thing that Archibald Bullock did is at one point he allowed William Grimes to work and make his own money. And I believe that William Grimes says that Archibald Bullock told him, okay, look, go find you work to do. I'm going to be gone. I'm going to be in New York for a while. While I'm in New York, he's in Savannah, Georgia. Find you some work and just pay me $3 per week. Anything over $3 per week that you make, you'll be able to keep for yourself. And so one of the jobs that William Grimes had, William worked on a captured British ship called the Epervier. The Epervier. And the reason why I included this is because that ship is an important ship. And we're going to look at why here in just a second. But look at what William Grimes says. He says, I was then left by my master's order to work out and pay him $3 per week and find myself. I then went to work for Mr. Irving on board the Epervier, who was manager on board. He gave me $1 for each day I worked there. So you can do the math. If he works 7 days, he makes $7 in a week, and he only has to give Bullock 3, so he keeps 4. If he works 5 days, he makes $5. He gives Bullock 3, he keeps 2. So in this way, he was able to make money. But look at what William Grimes says. And this is another reason why how it shows that our ancestors are right there when history is being made, and they give us more information in these slave narratives than you're going to get when you just research certain historical topics. He says the Epervier was a vessel taken from the British in the last war, the War of 1812. I saw 7 truckloads of gold and silver in boxes taken from her and carried to the bank in Savannah. I worked for Mr. Irving about a month. He paid me off, and I worked about town for a few days after. Now, William Grimes is telling us that he worked on a British ship that was taken from the British. In the last war, it was called the Epervier, and he also says that he saw 7 truckloads of gold and silver in boxes taken off of the ship. So obviously this is British money. So we got to ask, is the ancestor telling the truth? Is this an actual historical account? And as always, yes, it is. Yes, it is. Look, capture of the HMS Epervier. The capture of HMS Epervier was a naval action fought off the coast of Florida near Cape Canaveral on April 28, 1814, between the United States ship-rigged sloop of war USS Peacock. So the USS Peacock in the War of 1812 had a naval battle with the Epervier, and the Epervier was captured. Now, the ancestor says that they took 7 truckloads of gold and silver off of it. Now, is there any truth to that? Look down where it says aftermath. According to Wikipedia, the Americans repaired the damage to Peacock's rigging within an hour. Peacock's first lieutenant took charge of the prize and succeeded in preventing it from sinking. The prize crew had the brig ready to sail by nightfall. Epervier was found to be carrying $118,000 in specie, that's basically like coins used for money, which was private rather than government property. So this money wasn't property of the British government. The Epervier was like a merchant ship, but it was used in the war, and it was also when the naval battle took place. There were multiple British ships. A lot of them escaped. That was in the British merchant convoy. A lot of them escaped, but the Epervier was actually captured. Now, in today's money, $118,000 doesn't sound like 7 truckloads of gold and silver coins. But back then, $118,000 was a lot more money. A lot more money. So we know that again, the ancestor, I don't believe he was, because he would have mentioned it. I don't believe that he was on the ship when the naval battle actually took place, because he would have said that. But he had to have been working on the Epervier and around the Epervier right when this naval battle took place, because he saw the money being taken off of it. And we know that they didn't leave the money on there for several years, right, before they took the crates off. He was there right when the battle took place, the battle of the Peacock and the Epervier. The ancestor William Grimes was there, and he gives us primary information that not only are they saying $118,000 worth of gold coins, silver coins was found, we know that it was somewhere around 7 truckloads. Now, get this. Let's move forward. Just to hold on. Is that all I wanted to? Yeah. Okay. So basically, then he talks about how he did, he did more work while Archibald was in New York. He was allowed to make more money, and he talks about the things that he saw. Now, this is another interesting thing that I wanted to point out, because shortly after him being bought by Archibald Bullock is when he actually escaped. So we're getting close to him actually escaping now. And so one of the reasons why he no longer wanted to be a slave of Archibald Bullock. Remember, I told you a lot of times when William Grimes had a bad experience with a slave master, he endeavored to get himself sold to a new master. So after being enslaved to Archibald Bullock for not too long, he endeavored to get sold off again. And why? Because he was blamed for stealing wine that a worker had actually stolen. Now, what wine is he talking about? Well, Archibald Bullock and his wife had the mansion that's on your screen built in around 1818. Now, this isn't the actual house that they lived in when they owned William Grimes. It is the house that they had built after the fact. Okay. Or it was the house that was being worked on leading up to this. And so at one point, while there were workers working to build the cellar, build the house, build the mansion that Archibald Bullock and his wife would eventually live in, William Grimes is there. And so his master bottles up some wine, tells him to go put it inside of the cellar. So William Grimes, he gets the wine, he goes to put it inside of the cellar. Then he leaves to go get a basket and take care of some other business. And while he's gone, one of the men, one of the carpenters that are working on the house, takes the bottle of wine or one of the bottles of wine, drinks it, and disposes of the bottle. And so that night, Archibald Bullock tells William Grimes, hey, the wine that I told you to take and put up for me, go get it, bring it to me. William Grimes goes get the wine. He brings it to him. Archibald Bullock notices that one of the wine glasses, one of the wine bottles is missing, and he blames William for it. William says he didn't do it. He didn't do it. He didn't do it. He blames him for it anyway. And even after it became apparent that one of the workers had stolen the wine because he came forth and confessed, Archibald Bullock thought that he had coerced the man into confessing just so he wouldn't be whipped. And so William Grimes, being very distraught at this, saying how much he worked so hard to be a good slave for Archibald Bullock, and he always tried to tell the truth, and he always tried to do the right thing. For him to be accused of something that he didn't do, he said that was just too much for him to bear. And so he immediately started trying to figure out a way to get himself sold. Okay, all because of this situation with this wine. Now, he understood that in order to get sold, there had to be a serious infraction had to take place in order for him to get sold, or something. There had to be a reason, basically. One time he was able to get sold because he forced himself to stop eating, and he stopped eating long enough to where his current slave master thought that he was going to die, thought that he was really sick, and thought that he was going to die. And so he decided to sell him before he died. And so William knew that in trying to get sold, he would likely incur some negative outcomes, but he was willing to endure that in order to get free, right? So what he ends up doing is, just like he found Archibald Bullock to buy him, he went and found someone else and asked someone else if they would buy him. This individual says that, yes, if your master is willing to sell you, then yes, I'll buy you. I don't have any problem buying you. But William Grimes knew that if he went to his master and told him that a man wanted to buy him, he would most likely be beaten and punished, because his master, he did so much for his master that his master couldn't do without him. He was such an integral part. He did so much around the house. He drove the carriage. He took care of the horses. He did so much. He knew that Archibald Bullock was not going to want to let him go. So he eventually get up enough guts. He goes to Archibald Bullock and he says, hey, someone wants to buy me. Will you be willing to sell me? This causes Archibald Bullock to fly into a rage. He flies into the rage. He picks up a chair. He swings it at William Grimes 2 or 3 times. He misses. He eventually throws down the chair. The chair breaks. He grabs William Grimes by his collar and he just starts punching him all in his face, his neck, his shoulders, his chest, blow after blow after blow. Bam, 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 hitting him. And William Grimes can do nothing but accept the blows because he understands that he can be killed if he fights back. And he is trying to get sold off anyway because he no longer wants to be a slave of Archibald Bullock in the first place. So William Grimes is beaten bloody, right? He's beaten bloody. And so what he ends up doing is he just decides he tries to run away. So he runs out the room, he runs downstairs, he runs out the house, and he runs towards the horses stable. His master, Archibald Bullock, chases him. William Grimes was assuming that maybe he wouldn't give chase. He'll let him get away because it was almost dinner time. He'll eat his dinner and probably try to punish him again later. But Archibald Bullock was so enraged, he chased him all the way to the horse stable. So he chases him to the horse stable. He grabs him again, and he starts beating him again, beating him until blood is literally running down his face. He said he's covered in blood. There's blood all over his shirt, and the man keeps hitting him. Then he calls for another slave by the name of Jack. He tells Jack to come and get a rope so that he can tie William Grimes up and beat him further. Jack looks for a rope, says he can't find one. Archibald Bullock gets upset. He begins to beat Jack as well. So now he's beating William. He's beating Jack. Jack eventually finds a rope. He ties up William Grimes, and he proceeds to beat him more and more. Then he tells Jack to go and get the constable so that the constable can take William Grimes to jail, and he could take him to jail, and he could be beaten more times in jail. Because one thing that not many people understand is that prisons existed during the time of slavery. And our ancestors, even as slaves, could be thrown in jail. Sometimes they would be thrown in jail by their master, the plantation owner, to be whipped and beaten, held for a certain amount of time, and then released, or whipped and beaten and then sold, and a lot of times sold off down south to a harsher plantation into a harsher state. Now, there's one interesting thing that comes up over and over and over and over. When the ancestors talk about going or being thrown in jail and being whipped in jail, they always refer to something that they call Moses' Law. Moses' Law. And Moses' Law was a common punishment for slaves back then. Look what he says. He says, had he, at the time the constable advised him not to have me whipped again, persisted in having his orders executed, which I knew to be Moses' law, that is 40 stripes save one. Because basically, when the constable came, Archibald Bullock tells him, arrest him, take him to prison, and hold him there. And the constable was like, man, look, we don't want to take him to prison and whip him anymore. I'll take him to prison, but the dude's bloody. You already beat him enough. You should let him alone. And so William Grimes thought that his slave master was going to persist and insist that he get what's known as Moses' Law. And so you see in the highlighted portion, he says that Moses' Law, from what he knows, is 40 stripes save one. So that's 39 lashes with the whip. And this was like, there was no set amount of lashes that you could give a slave, but there was a quote unquote unwritten rule or unwritten law that they call Moses' Law. Well, it would be 39 lashes with the whip. And why do they call it Moses' Law? And what does it come from? It comes directly from the Bible, hence Moses. In Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 1 through 3, the Bible is describing how the court system for the Israelites should be set up. And if you look at verse 3, it says, 40 stripes he may give him, and not exceed, lest if he should exceed and beat him above these with many stripes, then thy brother should seem vile unto thee. Saying that if you give him anything over 40 stripes, then you look bad. Okay, you look bad. And so the Moses law is the 40 stripes. But in order to not exceed the 40 stripes on accident, it became a Jewish custom to only give 39. This is why William Grimes says 40 stripes save one. And we can see the concept of this Jewish custom taken from the law of Moses and the Torah in 2 Corinthians 11:24. Paul is talking about all the things that he has suffered from preaching the gospel. And in verse 24, he says, of the Jews, 5 times received I 40 stripes save one. So he's saying 5 different times he received 40 stripes save one. What does that come from? The 40 stripes comes from Deuteronomy, the Torah, the law of Moses, and the save one, making it 39, was a Jewish custom to ensure that you did not accidentally exceed 40 and give 41. So if you're aiming for 39, if you accidentally give one more, you're still in line with the 40 lashes. So this concept in the Bible translated into American slavery and is known as Moses' law. You're going to see it and hear it everywhere when they talk about getting whipped in jail. Never wasn't always that amount, but a lot of times it was. And so William Grimes, he's taken off by the constable. They don't give him Moses' law, but they do lock him up. They do lock him up until he's eventually sold again. So he got what he wanted out the deal, but he had to endure certain things while he was in jail. And the conditions of that jail were horrendous. Horrendous. Look what he says right here. After he was thrown in jail, after that, I was compelled to lie there in my solitary cell for the space of 3 weeks before any person appeared to buy me. The room in which I was placed was so foul and full of vermin, it was almost insupportable. The lice were so thick and large that I was obliged to spread a blanket, which I had procured myself, on the floor, and as they crawled upon it, take a junk or porter bottle, a glass bottle, which I found in the jail, and roll it over the blanket repeatedly. And in the same way that I have seen people grind or powder mustard seed on a board, I could always hear the death of some announced by their cracking. This I had to observe daily, and indeed often 2 or 3 times, and perhaps more times each day. Besides all this, I had often to take off my shirt, pick them out of my collar, pile them up as fast as I could, and take the bottle to crush them. My readers will here understand that this room had constantly, previous to my imprisonment therein, been occupied as a prison for Negroes. They, no more than myself, having a privilege of a change of linen or water wherewith to cleanse it. Any person would naturally suppose the place to be, vulgarly speaking, filled with lice, and it was when I went there, as nigh filled as any building I ever entered. So he's talking about being locked up for 3 weeks in a lice infested jail cell after being beaten bloody by his slave master. This is what he had to endure in order to get himself sold. How you doing, Sandra Askew? I see you in the chat. I'm Pooh, the real bookworm. Good afternoon, and thank you. Good afternoon to you as well. Good afternoon to you as well. You're more than welcome. So I want you guys to think about that. Picture a small jail cell. And picture so much lice that you could put a blanket on the floor and so many lice will hop onto this blanket that you can use a glass bottle like a roller and roll it over the blanket to try to smash them and kill them. And every so often, you have to do this 2 or 3 times, 4, 5, 6 times a day. Put this blanket down, let them crawl on it and kill them. Also, they're climbing on your clothes, they're climbing on your head, they're climbing on your legs, your feet, your hands, to where you will have to take off your shirt and pick them out of the collar of your shirt. And you have to pick them off fast and pile them up and then try to use the bottle to smash them, to kill them. And lice are so small and they're so hard to kill that this would have been like psychological torture to live in these conditions. And not only was William Grimes imprisoned here, he said it had been constantly used to imprison Negroes. And he was here for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Like I know prisons are bad now and there are inhumane conditions. And we may complain about the inhumane conditions, but some of the conditions that our ancestors had to go through were far more inhumane than we can think of. And so, there are basically 3 different types of lice: head lice, body lice, pubic lice, meaning this lice infested room, lice is getting all over this guy, all over poor William Grimes. And some of the symptoms is itching, lice on the scalp, body, clothes, or pubic hair, or other body hair, lice eggs, sores on the scalp, neck, shoulders, bite marks, swollen lymph nodes. So they're biting you. He's getting sores on his scalp, sores on his neck, sores on his shoulder. He's itching, he's scratching, and he's getting nothing in the area of relief. But he understood that he would have to go through this if he wanted to get a new master other than Archibald Bullock. And so it is shortly after this is when William Grimes actually makes his escape to freedom. Shortly after this, while he's in prison and he's living under those conditions, he ends up being bought by a man named Mr. White. And from Mr. White, he's bought by a man named Mr. Wellman. And while he was the property of Mr. Wellman, he gets hired out to somebody named Mr. Oliver Sturgis. And from working for Mr. Oliver Sturgis, he finally effectuates his escape. Look what he says. After I had got through with all my trouble with Mr. Bullock, being in jail and being beat, a Mr. White came and bought me out of jail for $500. He came to the jail and spoke to me, saying he would buy me if I would consent to drive his horses. I told him I would. I was accordingly let out of jail soon after and went to his house. I found him to be a cross, crabbed man. I did not stay with him long. I lived with him perhaps 2 or 3 months when a certain Mr. Wellman came to my master's and bought me. This was the 8th time that I had been sold for $500 each time. My master did not buy me for his present use. He hired me out to Mr. Oliver Sturgis, the man who had owned me before. I worked for Mr. Sturgis about 4 or 5 months. He had a man from New York whom he hired for $30 per month. He wanted to go home. Mr. Sturgis offered Mr. Wellman the same wages for me. Whilst I was there, I drove his horses, took care of his carriage, and occasionally attended the people in the house. I have experienced the sufferings of a slave in the southern states. I have traveled from Fredericktown in Maryland to Darien in Georgia, and from there to Savannah, from whence I made my escape in the following manner. While I belonged to Mr. Wellman, he went with his family to Bermuda and left me to work for what I could get by paying him $3 per week. During this time, the brig casket from Boston arrived. I went with a number more to assist in loading. I soon got acquainted with some of the Yankee soldiers, and they appeared to be quite pleased with me. Her cargo chiefly consisted of cotton and bales. After filling her hold, they were obliged to lash a great number of bales on deck. The sailors, growing more and more attached to me, they proposed to me to leave in the center of the cotton bales on deck a hole or place sufficiently large for me to stow away in, with my necessary provisions. Whether they then had any idea of my coming away with them or not, I cannot say, but this I can say safely. A place was left, and I occupied it during the passage, and by that means made my escape. Hotel to you too, Brooklyn Zoo. Hotel family, I see you in the building. And so basically what he's saying is, when he came into the when he became the property of Mr. Wellman hired him out to a Mr. Sturgis. Now this guy, Mr. Sturgis, allowed him to work on a boat called the Casket, and the Casket came from Boston, right? And so the white men on the boat, it was white men and colored men on the boat, but the white men on the boat from Boston, they grew a liking to William Grimes, and they told him, hey, why don't you just stow away on the ship, come with us back to the north, and you can be free. You can be free. And so the white man put it in his mind, man, bro, why don't you just escape? Why are you even dealing? Why are you even dealing with this? Just hide out on the boat, come to the north. We know plenty of black people that's free. We're free there. Slavery doesn't exist where we're from, especially in Boston. And there were a lot of free blacks in New York. And so this is what William Grimes decides to do. He decides to hide out on the ship, the Casket. And this is how he eventually got free, when someone gave him that idea and they told him, hey, if you can make it to here, you'll be free. You won't have to worry about the stuff that you have to worry about anymore. And so somebody may wonder, why would men from Boston even try to convince William Grimes to escape to freedom? And see, this is one of the nuanced things when we talk about our history in America. Sometimes people are like, you know what? Well, I talked to my grandparents, my great grandparents, and they talk to their grandparents, and they say that, we weren't slaves. We don't descend from slaves. And there's a number of things that they could mean by that. But what we have to understand is, during the time period of slavery, all black people weren't slaves. That's just the truth. And even if a black person started off as a slave, they didn't always die as one. They had means and methods to get free. But while slavery was roaring in the 1800s, when William Grimes was around, when he escaped in 1814, while slavery was going on in the southern states in Georgia where he was at, there were other states where slavery didn't even exist in the same United States. And Massachusetts is one of them, Boston, Massachusetts. When you look at the history of slavery in Massachusetts, look, it says, although slavery in the United States is typically associated with the Caribbean and the antebellum American South, enslaved people existed to a lesser extent in New England. Historians estimate that between 1755 and 1764, the Massachusetts enslaved population was approximately 2.2% of the total population. The slave population was generally concentrated in the industrial and coastal towns. Unlike in the American South, enslaved people in Massachusetts had legal rights, including the ability to file legal suits in court. So even when slavery in the 1700s was going on in Massachusetts, it wasn't the same type of slavery in the South. They had legal rights. And so they said that the practice of slavery in Massachusetts was ended gradually through case law. As an institution, it died out in the late 18th century through judicial actions litigated on behalf of slaves seeking manumission. Now, this is something that I want to point out. Slavery in Massachusetts ended in the 1700s, right? One of the things that led to it ending was interpretation of the legal system and the constitution of the state. The constitution, every state has a constitution. Okay, every state has a constitution, and we also have the Constitution of the United States as a whole. Now, the Constitution as a whole and the Constitution of Massachusetts, it all states that all men are born free, right? That all men are born or are created equal and free. And so an interpretation of that is what led to slowly but surely slavery being abolished in Massachusetts as a whole, with a successive round of legal victories. And once one legal victory was had, then the next individual trying to lay claim to their freedom, they could use the precedent set by that first legal case, and then they can get their freedom. Look how it describes it. It says, unlike some other jurisdictions, enslaved people in Massachusetts occupied a dual legal status of being both property and person. So they were property, but they were also people. They were persons. They were human. They weren't just chattel before the law, which entitled them to file legal suits in court. That was the key. Prominent Massachusetts lawyer Benjamin Kent represented slaves in court against their masters as early as 1752. Now, remember, this is when America is still 13 colonies. In Massachusetts, you had slaves taking their masters to court. He won the first freedom suit in the British American colonies in 1766. Again, this is before the Declaration of Independence. A man named Benjamin Kent had already won a freedom suit for a slave in the British American colony. The post-revolutionary court cases started in 1781, heard arguments contending that slavery was a violation of Christian principles and also a violation of the Constitution of the Commonwealth. During the years 1781 to 1783, in three related cases known today as the Walker case, the Supreme Judicial Court applied the principle of judicial review to effectively abolish slavery in 1783 by declaring it incompatible with the state constitution that had just been adopted in 1780. So the state constitution said that all men are created free and equal. So once they had that legal document stating that, lawyers were able to go to court and fight for the freedom and manumission of enslaved individuals based on the Constitution. And since it was already in law that, yes, a slave was considered property, but they also were a person and had legal rights. So if they're a person and all people are created equal and free, you have a legal basis to fight the institution of slavery on. And that eventually led to slavery being abolished in Massachusetts in the 1700s. So decades later, when you have a ship from Boston, the casket come down, and these what they call Yankees is really Northerners. When the Northerners came down, they're doing business in the southern states, and a lot of them was looking at slavery as savage. Where they were from, slavery didn't exist anymore. And so they told William Grimes, bro, listen, if you just come to where we at, you won't even be a slave no more because slavery isn't allowed there. And William Grimes took him up on this. But one of the things that hurt that system is since slavery was still legal in the South, right? Even sometimes when our ancestors would escape, they would have the slave catchers from the South come to the North, capture our ancestors who had escaped, and bring them back to slavery. And they had legal recourse to do so, which is why a lot of our individuals, when they escaped, they went all the way to Canada. They went all the way to Canada because once you got to Canada, you weren't even on American soil anymore. Slavery wasn't in Canada. You couldn't come all the way to Canada, grab them up, and take them all the way back to the South. It just wasn't happening like that. You're out of your jurisdiction, right? But even with the whole concept of slave catchers coming to get runaways, a lot of, well, I don't know about a lot, but in many instances, quote unquote, slave catchers would kidnap our ancestors who were legally free in the North, and they would take them into slavery. Look, a large threat to former slaves and free men living in Massachusetts, however, was that posed by slave catchers whose profession was to look for runaway slaves who had successfully fled from the South and sheltered in the North. Under American law at that time, these individuals were subject to detention and returned to slavery in any jurisdiction that had not yet ended slavery. Many abuses were also committed in which even blacks who were freeborn in the North could be falsely accused of being runaway slaves and spirited away to a life of slavery, as in the infamous case of Solomon Northrop, who was freeborn in New York and kidnapped into slavery in Louisiana. Who was that? That's the guy that the movie 12 Years a Slave was made about. Have you ever saw 12 Years a Slave? That's a real story. That really happened. Solomon Northup is a real man. And what happened was he was born in New York. He was born free. He had a wife who was free. He had children who were free. And he was kidnapped one night. He was tricked into going from New York to Washington. He was kidnapped in Washington, beaten, and sold into slavery in Louisiana. And he was enslaved for 12 years before he was able to secure his freedom again and make it back to his family in New York. And so when he made it back to his family in New York, he wrote what we call a slave narrative called 12 Years a Slave. 12 Years a Slave is a book. It's a slave narrative that I own. And they eventually made that into a movie. So even after William Grimes escaped, because he did get on the casket, he did escape, he made it to freedom. He was free for a while, but there was always the expectation that the slave catchers would capture him and take him back to slavery in the South. Okay. And so what ends up happening with William Grimes, he escapes in like 1814, 1815, something like that. He's a fugitive slave for 10 years. And so in 1824, he gets spotted by someone who knows him from when he was a slave and knows that he's a runaway. So they go back to his master. They tell his master they spotted William Grimes. He's in the North. A man named Thornton at Thompson, he comes back to Grimes on behalf of his master and says, okay, look, you can buy your freedom. Now, William Grimes has been free for 10 years. He now has a wife named Clarissa. He has children. He has a house that he's in essence paying a mortgage on. He's trying to pay off his house. He's working odd jobs. He has friends. He's had businesses. It's been up and down. He's been taken to court for several things. He's lost court cases. He's won court cases. He's struggling. He's very poor. He's a poor man. He didn't gain his freedom and become rich. He didn't become a billionaire or tycoon or anything like that. But he's making a life for himself. And so when he's finally spotted, his heart drops in his chest. He finds out that there's a possibility that he can be taken back into slavery. And so he's given an option: buy his freedom or go back into slavery. And we're not going to read all of this. I just put this on the screen so someone could pause it at their own leisure and read through some of this. I advise you get the book, read the entire book. But look what he says. He says, after I returned to Litchfield, Mr. Thompson came on as I anticipated, with power from my master to free me or take me back. He said he would put me in irons and send me down to New York and then on to Savannah if I did not buy myself. I instantly offered to give up my house and land, all I had. The house was under a mortgage to Dr. Cotton, of Mr. Burroughs from the South. And basically he goes on to say that he had to sell his house, he had to sell his land, he had to sell all of his property in order to not be enslaved. Look what he says. I went to the governor and told him the whole story. And the governor said, not so, Grimes. You must have what you get hereafter for yourself. Basically telling him that they want to take him back to slavery. But Grimes had made a name for himself. People knew him. They liked him, even the governor. And so he says, the governor did pity my case and was willing to assist me, for such is his feeling to the poor. To be put in irons and dragged back to a state of slavery and either leave my wife and children in the street or take them into servitude was a situation in which my soul now shudders at the thought of having been placed. It would have been exhibited an awful spectacle of the conduct of inconsistency of men to have done it. Yet I was undoubtedly the lawful property of my master, according to the laws of the country. And though many would justify him, perhaps aid in taking me back, yet if there is any man in God's whole creation who will say with respect to himself, only bring the case home, that there are any possible circumstances in which it is just that he should be at the capricious disposal of a fellow being, if he will say that nature within him, that feeling, that reason tells him so, or can convince him so, that man lies. The soul of a man cannot be made to feel it, to think it, to own it, or believe it, that a man should own another man. I may give my life for the good or the safety of others, but no law, no consequences, not the lives of millions, can authorize them to take my life or liberty from me while innocent of any crime. Basically saying that if I have not done anything wrong, if I have not broken any laws, nothing in my soul can convince me that it is right to take me back into slavery. I have to thank my master, however, that he took what I had and freed me. I gave a deed of my house to a gentleman in Litchfield. He paid the money for it to Mr. Thompson, who then gave me my free papers. Oh, how my heart did rejoice and thank God. From what anxiety, what pain and heartache did it relieve me. For even though I might have fared better the rest of my life under my master, yet the thought of being snatched up and taken back was awful. Accustomed as I had been to freedom for years, the miseries of slavery which I had felt and knew and tasted were presented to my mind in no faint image. So he sells all that he has, gives up everything that he has worked for, but in return, he gets his freedom papers. And he even says over and over that he was not a rich man. He was poor. He struggled. He didn't always have enough to eat. It was hard to feed his children. It was hard to feed himself. It was hard to feed his wife. It was hard for them to take care of each other. And he knew that if he was a slave, somebody else would be responsible for feeding him and clothing him and taking care of him. But the heartache and pain that came with being the property of someone else, he said that he would rather be poor and destitute and free than have someone take care of him and feed him and be a slave. And I understand that. I understand that. And ironically enough, it is because of this situation right here that we have the book Life of William Grimes today. Think about it. He was free for 10 years. He didn't write the book in that 10 years time period. He only wrote the book after he lost it all. How do we know that? Because he's talking about losing it all in the book. So, so it had to have already happened. But what happened was, since he had lost it all and he had no money, people in the abolitionist movement and some of his friends, they suggested that he write his story, write his book, and sell his book as a way of making money, talking about what he endured in slavery. It would benefit him because it would be a means of income, and it would benefit the abolitionist movement because the abolitionist movement loved to have ex-slaves talk about their experiences in slavery to show people how bad it was, to convince the powers that be to abolish it. There was a whole lecture circuit where ex-slaves went around lecturing and speaking. One of the ex-slaves who became the most famous for this was Frederick Douglass, because he was so intelligent and he could speak so well. He rose to heights. But Frederick Douglass wasn't the only one speaking on the lecture circuit. He wasn't the only one who wrote a book. He wasn't the only one who escaped and helped with the abolitionist movement. It's just because he could speak so well. A great orator can become famous, you know, and Frederick Douglass was that. And so because of this situation, William Grimes, he writes his book. He writes his book. He begins to sell his book. And he actually sells more copies than he thought he would. Look what he goes in to say towards the end of the book. Look, he says, I have forbore to mention names in my history where it might give the least pain. In this, I have made it less interesting and injured myself, meaning there was more people that he could name, like that he could name drop and talk about things that he saw and things that he experienced. But I guess he didn't want to hurt certain people. He didn't want to embarrass certain people. And, you know, maybe he was afraid to say certain things. We could all think about that. Like, we all have our own lives, right? Now, you may talk about your life history, things you've been through in your life. But if you were to write a book about it, there's some stories that you're going to leave out. And there may be some interactions that you've had with certain people that you don't talk about. You don't say their name. You don't say what they did, just because it's, you just don't want to be, you don't want to be involved in that. You don't want to hurt nobody's feelings or make nobody upset or look at you or somebody else the wrong way. So I understand. He says, I may sometimes be a little mistaken as I have to write from memory, and there is a great deal I have omitted from want of recollection at the time of writing. I cannot speak as I feel on some subjects. If those who read my history think I have not led a life of trial, I have failed to give a correct representation. I think I must be 40 years of age, but don't know. I cannot tell my wife my age. I have learned to read and write pretty well. If I had an opportunity, I could learn very fast. My wife has had a tolerable good education, which has been a help to me. I hope some will buy my books from charity, but I am no beggar. I am now entirely destitute of property. Where and how I shall live, I don't know. Where and how I shall die, I don't know. But I hope I may be prepared. If it were not for the stripes on my back, which were made while I was a slave, I would in my will leave my skin as a legacy to the government, desiring that it might be taken off and made into parchment, and then bind the Constitution of glorious, happy, and free America. Let the skin of an American slave bind the charter of American liberty. And he signs it with William Grimes. Now, imagine this. After all of the hardships that William Grimes endured in his life, after being beaten, being sold, being treated like cattle, being treated like chattel, the ups and downs of his life, the horrors that he saw, the horrors that he experienced, escaping the freedom, being free for 10 years and almost having that freedom snatched, acquiring a wife, a house, children, property, having all of that taken from you, basically with a gun to your head, saying if you don't give up everything that you have, you're going to go back into slavery, and then falling back into the pits of despair and poverty and destitution. Someone coming up with the idea to write a book simply talking about the struggles that you endured in your life, suggesting that he can turn his trials and tribulations into profit. So he writes his book, a book that he could not have been able to write without the trials and tribulations that he endured. He writes his book. His book does well. He becomes famous. He becomes famous in his area. Everybody knows his name now. Everybody knows his face. He makes money. He doesn't become rich. He doesn't become rich. He still has to work a job, but he can sustain himself now. His free life is sustainable because he was able to tell the story about his life as a slave. And his trials and tribulations were transformed into what he used to afford a new life. And so what he ended up doing, he, like 30 years later, after writing this book, right, in 1824, 1825, after writing this book, he added on an addendum to the book. People, his friends start telling them, well, we love your book. We love your book. William Grimes, old Grimes, old Grimes, old Grimes. He became known as Old Grimes. Remember in the very beginning, I told you about the poem, the nursery rhyme called Old Grimes, written about his grandfather. Now he's the new Old Grimes that everybody knows. And he realized that people wanted to know what happened to him after the events in the book, because his initial book ended with him saying, I lost everything, but I achieved my freedom papers. So there was really no story about what happened after he was legally free. You see what I'm saying? The story is about when he was a runaway, while he was a fugitive, while he was a slave, but the book ended when he actually gained his freedom. And so he adds on to the book. If you get a updated version of it, look for the one that's on the screen, that's edited by William L. Andrews and Regina E. Mason. Regina Mason being one of his descendants that's still alive today. Get this book because it has the extra part added to it. And in the extra part, look, this is what he says. It is now more than 30 years since the foregoing true and eventful life was written and published. Although a large edition was printed, a very few copies are now in existence. And it was only when I advertised in the public papers that I was myself enabled to procure a perfect one. By the kindness of a gentleman who will long be held in grateful remembrance, a copy was put in my hands. So he says that after 30 years, he wanted a copy. He didn't have a perfect copy of his own book, and he wanted one, and one man had one, and he let him have it. A large number of my intimate friends have urgently requested me to print another edition of my life, with such additions as I can find time to add in this my old age. I am greatly indebted to many distinguished men of New Haven and the obligations I owe them. I hope in a measure to repay by presenting to them this second edition of the life of one who has often been called one of the most remarkable personages of modern times. I comply with the request for the purpose, in the first place, of raising, if possible, a small amount of money. For I believe almost everybody will purchase a copy of my life And in the second place, to gratify the laudable curiosity with so many of my friends, which so many of my friends have exhibited to procure a true and perfect life of old Grimes. And so then he goes into detail about everything that he had been experiencing as a free man. He talks about opening up businesses, being a barber. He talks about how he met his wife's name, which was Clarissa. He talks about his children, what they have been doing. And when you read the extra part added to the end of his book, and you read the first part of his book, even with how he writes, you can sense his happiness, his joy, his contentment, his satisfaction. Even in the first part of his book, when he talked about being a slave and he talked about escaping to freedom, you can almost feel the dark cloud that's over him from reading how he speaks, how he writes, what he chooses to talk about. And even when he's describing a happy moment in slavery, you can tell that there's always a sense that things can go bad at any moment, that his life isn't his own. He never was really, really, truly happy. But then in an addendum to the end of the book, this conclusion that he wrote after 30 years, you can sense that he's happy, that he's not anxious, he's not stressed, he's not worried about what's going to happen to him tomorrow. You see, and it's you have to get the book and read it. And if you read it, I promise you'll understand exactly what I'm saying. I can't fully describe it and explain it. You have to experience it. You read that first part of the book, you read that second part of the book, night and day. Night and day. And me being an author, all of these slave narratives, I feel so drawn to, just like any book that I read. I feel drawn to it because I write. I understand putting, your thoughts, feelings, emotions, life down on paper for someone to read, 1,000 years in the future. Now, think about it. His book was published in 1825. It's 2025 right now. That's 200 years ago. You hear what I said? 200 years ago. You're looking in the face of a man who wrote 200 years ago. And you can feel connected to him in his story because we are our ancestors. And so what I'm going to leave you with as I wrap up this video is the last two paragraphs that he wrote in his own book. He says, "And now, as I have brought my narrative to a close, I wish only to add a few lines to say that I hope all my friends and acquaintances will purchase a copy of my book and thus help old Grimes to pay the printer and have a small amount left to carry him safely through the coming year. As before remarked, I am now an old man and am almost wholly dependent on my acquaintances for the means of support. And while the purchasers of my book benefit me by doing so, I hope and believe they will find themselves abundantly repaid by the perusal of it. The book, as will be seen, is illustrated by a likeness of old Grimes, engraved by Sanford from a photograph by Wells, Doggerian artist, 10 and 11 Mitchell's Building. I am indebted to the generosity of Mr. Wells for this likeness of myself, and I here return him my thanks, and would recommend all my readers to visit his rooms, examine his specimens of photograph and daguerreotype likenesses, and then have their own taken. Here I part with my readers. It is not likely that I shall ever again appear before the public as an author. I hope, however, long to enjoy the kind regards of the good people of New Haven. And when this old, weary, worn out body is laying in that place prepared for all living, the silent tear may be dropped for poor old Grimes and his frailties, whatever they be, forgotten. To all I now bid farewell. And to William Grimes, the ancestor, I say, may your name live on forever and may your memory never die. Hotel.